All right, everyone, good morning. Hello, we are live on our Facebook page. It is right at 10 a.m., so we're going to go ahead and get started with our video today. Thank you ahead of time for all of those who join us this morning or anyone who watches this video down the road in the future. And thank you to our speaker, Trish Smith, for being here today. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. So just a little introduction to the series before we get started. This is the first live speaker event we have planned in a 4-part series on the introduction between brain injury and domestic violence. And the rest of those speakers are going to be joining us over the next few weeks to talk about different topics related to this intersection. But today, Trish is going to be providing us with an introduction to this topic, as well as sharing some of her professional experience working with this population. But before I turn things over to her, I know that I'm a new face for everyone. So hello, my name is Danielle, and I'm an occupational therapy student working with the Brain Injury Association of Virginia this summer. And I'm very excited to be facilitating our event today and connecting people from the brain injury community and the domestic violence community and bringing some attention to this topic. So if you're watching with us live this morning, be sure to leave any questions you have for our speaker in the comment section on this video, and if we have some time at the end today, we'll address a few of those. So I'm now going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for the day. Everybody, this is Trish Smith. Trish, again, thank you so much for joining us today and being here to talk about this topic. Do you want to start by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Danielle. I appreciate the intro. So hi, everyone. My name's Trish. I use pronouns she, they. I'm a resident in counseling and sexual and domestic violence counselor at Safe Harbor, which is a nonprofit agency that serves individuals impacted by sexual and domestic violence and sex trafficking in Henrico County, Virginia. I also serve on the board of directors for the Brain Injury Association of Virginia.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So we're going to go ahead and ask Trish a few questions, and then we'll get to any questions you guys have for today. So Trish, can you just start off by telling us a little bit about the intersection between brain injury and domestic violence and why it's so important?
Yes, definitely. So when we consider the intersection between brain injury and domestic violence, I think it's helpful to start by highlighting the prevalence of this issue with current research. So in doing that, I'm going to be referring to, excuse me, I'm going to be referring to possible brain injury as a result of intimate partner violence because we recognize domestic violence as an umbrella term. I'll also be referring to women as that is my population of focus, and based on current research, is who we see typically impacted more by this type of violence. But I also do want to make a point, too, of saying that men also experience physical violence, intimate partner violence, and have underreported rates for a number of reasons. But with that being said, about 1 in 4 women experience severe physical intimate partner violence. Again, we want to consider underreporting due to factors such as fear and shame. But with that, injury to the neck, head, and face areas, including attempted strangulation, are common mechanisms of TBI from IPV. And, we've seen it across a range of studies. An estimated 62 to 92% of injuries make up this type of violence. And we know these numbers fluctuate from study to study, and I'm not going to get too much into the numbers because I know we do have another guest speaker who's going to get more into that. But that kind of helps to frame it a little bit. So anywhere between 62% and 92% of injuries can lead to the neck, head, and face, and possible TBI. So when we consider this, the likelihood of TBI from these injuries, we have to consider the possibility of mild traumatic brain injury, or concussions as we commonly refer to it, and also anoxic brain injuries, which are brain injuries resulting from oxygen deprivation. So in the case of strangulation. Kind of getting a little bit into the prevalence. Like I said, I'm not going to get into it too much, but that's just a little bit to help us frame this and get an idea of how big of an issue this is. I'm going to dive into the intersection just a little bit more. So when we consider the experience of intimate partner violence as the cause of brain injury, we also have to consider the likelihood of overlapping symptoms related to PTSD, where it's been shown across studies that anywhere between 31% and 84% of survivors of IPV meet criteria for PTSD. So what does this mean? This can have a huge impact on recognizing brain injury and in brain injury recovery, given that many of the cognitive and behavioral symptoms from PTSD can overlap with that of TBI and can even exacerbate symptoms of TBI. So in addition to the possibility of PTSD, we also have to consider the possibility of multiple head injuries due to the cycle of violence. And considering the possibility of multiple brain injuries, we know that this can compound deficits, as is seen in many studies with retired professional boxers, where the number of rounds boxed rather than win-loss records were better predictors of cognitive impairment. We also know that individuals who sustain their first concussion have a risk that is 3 times greater of acquiring a second TBI. And that risk continues to increase drastically with additional injuries. So with all of that information, and there's so much more that we could dive into when really exploring this intersection of experiences, we have to consider what this means for some of the people that we're serving, who may be in abusive relationships where violence is often a cycle. Like, what does this mean for safety planning, for ongoing assessment, and also for recovery, both psychologically or emotionally and physically?
Great. Thank you for that overview. So I'm interested to hear a little bit more about you and how you became interested in this intersection between brain injury and domestic violence.
Sure. So my interest in this area actually connects with some of my history with BIAV and Safe Harbor. When I was in my master's program at VCU, I had to complete a clinical internship. And in searching for sites, I knew that I wanted experience working with individuals with brain injury and mental health concerns, but I also wanted clinical experience working with other forms of trauma as well. So I ended up interning at both the Brain Injury Association of Virginia and Safe Harbor. Um, when I started my internship, I realized that my 2 sites were actually more closely connected than what I originally thought going in. At Safe Harbor, I realized that I was actually working with a number of clients who were mostly women, in counseling, in the emergency room, and in courts, who had experienced physical violence from a partner and who may have had head injury based on the incident that they described, or even some of the symptoms that they reported. So, recognizing the connection between my 2 sites, in addition to facilitating or co-facilitating brain injury state support groups, assisting with statewide information and referral calls at BIAV. I also helped to organize a statewide outreach project that focused on traumatic brain injury as a result of intimate partner violence. And through that entire experience, I came to realize my new interest and passion, really, that was clinically working with women who had acquired brain injury from IPV.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. And can you dive a little deeper into the work that you have done with this population?
Yeah, sure. Definitely. First, though, I do want to talk a little bit more about some of the work that's been done and being done on some higher levels, from a lot of really fascinating people across the world, really. And just in case people who are watching this maybe are interested in this topic and want to explore it further, one great way to stay up to date on this is to check out an organization called Pink Concussions. So this organization has really taken such a collaborative lead on addressing this issue. Some of the top researchers in this area of partner-inflicted brain injury, such as Eve Valera from Harvard, Kate Iverson from Boston University, and she also works at the VA Boston Healthcare System, are connected with this agency. There's also Rachel Ramirez from the Ohio State Coalition, and who's actually going to be featured later in this Facebook series as one of the speakers. She's done some really great work in Ohio, and I know she's going to talk to you guys more about that, so I'll leave that to her. But some things that I've done at Safe Harbor, while my time was at Safe Harbor, I published an article back in 2018 with my co-author, Dr. Courtney Holmes at VCU, titled The Assessment and Treatment of Brain Injury in Women Impacted by Intimate Partner Violence and Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. So for those who are interested in maybe following up on this article offers a literature review, implications for clinicians doing counseling work with this population, and also a case study that really just ties that all together. I also helped with incorporating a screening tool at my agency for the counseling team that's an adapted version of the HELPS. So it's an adapted version of the HELPS and also an adapted version of the Pennsylvania Coalition's brain injury screening tool. Just to, and I say all this adapted because, just in considering the domestic violence lens and through my conversations with different clients, I realized some things had to sort of change up a little bit, had to be changed a little bit. So there's that, and helping my team to identify possible brain injury from IPV. I also developed a 14-session psychoeducational and processing group that I've now run 3 times for women with possible brain injury from IPV. This group offers a supportive and safe space for women with this intersection and provides education on topics related to brain injury and trauma from myself, from the trauma side of things, and then also various health professionals in the community. I especially have a lot of speakers from like VCU, from the Brain Injury Association of Virginia, and then also the concussion team at Sheltering Arms. So that's a little bit about the group there. For those who are interested maybe in learning a little bit more about that or some of that work that I've done at Safe Harbor, please, I'm going to offer my email at the end of this here, so you can feel free to reach out and I'd be happy to talk with you more about it. But on top of that, I've also just tried to do my part as an advocate, by incorporating this information into my agency's quarterly volunteer and new staff training for a session that I do where I talk about working with people with disabilities. It gives me a chance to spread awareness on this topic and to also discuss ways of, better serving this population.
Great, thanks for sharing that. So it sounds like there's a lot of great work being done, but I also know there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So what challenges make addressing the topic of brain injury with your clients so difficult?
Yes. So as you said, Danielle, a lot of really great work being done. We're making great strides in addressing this issue here. But obviously, there are a lot of challenges that we still have, and we still have a long ways to go. So one challenge is access to care. Okay, so in the case where resources might be limited because some of the typical barriers that we see with access to appropriate medical care. So maybe, for example, not having the financial means to access it, or maybe not having access to professionals who really understand brain injury. And then there are also some additional limitations that are created specifically by the dynamics of abuse, where folks may experience fear and shame from seeking services, or may even experience social isolation, which is a common experience that we see with abuse. And so this may decrease likelihood for the survivor to both recognize and access resources. There's also the challenge of survivors recognizing this. So I've worked with many people, many clients, like I said, across a range of settings, whether that's court or in the hospital or, in individual counseling or on the hotline. And sometimes in that experience, I've noticed there's an avoidance to even identify, avoidance or even hesitation with identifying with some of the symptoms of brain injury, because these may have been things that the abuser would always use against them. So for example, maybe this person, as a result of their injury, has difficulty with remembering things. Maybe the abuser would always say, would gaslight them. So gaslighting is a term that we use in the domestic violence field, where the abuser, the perpetrator, would totally deny their experience or the reality of what happened, and almost to the point sometimes where survivor would begin to question their reality of things, and would begin to doubt, their experience. And so when you have maybe something like gaslighting occurring in the relationship, maybe, we have to ask ourselves, what would it mean for this person to identify with these symptoms? Maybe that would mean confirming all the things that the abuser would say to them, would deny, and denying their experience and everything. Maybe this person, as a result of their injury, has a range of emotional reactions that where the abuser might have called them crazy. We know sometimes as a result of brain injury, there can be some behavioral symptoms, and there can be some behavioral and psychological symptoms. And so maybe the abuser would have said, like, why are you acting so crazy? Why are you overreacting? You're always overreacting all the time. And so for the survivor to, again, identify with that symptom or those symptoms, it might mean validating some of what the abuser had always told them. So, the survivor and recognizing possible symptoms of brain injury. There's also professionals recognizing it. So I think that we all, as professionals, non-professionals, everybody, we all have a lens that we see, that we experience life with, right? And this lens is created based on our personal and professional experiences, and it influences our judgment on things. So we're all victims to our biases. And so a lot of times what I've seen, considering this lens, a lot of times what I've seen is that people in the medical field, they obviously have this medical lens. They may, because they have such a medical lens, and maybe they don't have that additional lens of IPV or something, or considering IPV in that lens, they may oftentimes miss patients who are experiencing intimate partner violence or any other form of violence, right? And I know there's been a lot of different initiatives taken in the medical field to better address that issue. The same thing goes for in the anti-violence field. So you have domestic violence people who work in the field of domestic violence, who have maybe that trauma lens, and who have all these different pieces, aspects of domestic violence as a part of their lens, but then maybe they're missing that medical part. That the idea that of the injury, of the possibility of brain injury, and so that can definitely impact identifying and recognizing possible brain injury from this form of violence. There's also the limitations of screening tools. So this ties in with the professionals recognizing brain injury. I think screening tools are great. There's a lot of work right now being done, and that has been done, on trying to develop a screening tool that really fits with this population. Because, for example, one of the most common screening tools, the HELP screening tool, when we think about the experience of IPV, it doesn't quite fit really well with that. I feel like we're going to be missing a lot of people just trying to use the HELP screening tool. For example, have you ever been to the emergency room, right? Like, part of the HELP screening tools, have you ever been to the emergency room and been treated for injuries, to the head or something like that? I mean, again, considering our population of people who've experienced IPV, we know that many people, it's not uncommon that many people do not go to the emergency room and seek medical attention. So the limitations of the screening tools, and then finding one that really fits with our population. But also, I think that sometimes we also, when we do have a good screening tool, we may rely too much on it. And with that, I mean, I think screening tools are kind of that first step, but more importantly, a conversation needs to happen. I've experienced it way too often, where I've used, certain screening tools with clients, and they answered no to all of them, to every question on there. And it was only through conversation, a trauma-informed conversation, and building rapport with that client, that they began to put two and two together themselves and saying, oh, well, actually, Actually, yeah, that time did, that did happen. I do remember when he or she pushed me, and I fell, and I then hit my head on the dresser or something like that. So again, the limitations of us relying too much on screening tools, and the need for us to take it a step further and really develop conversation from that. Some other things that I have, but I'm not going to get too much into because I've already talked about it some before. The cycle of violence, right? That's obviously very problematic. The safety planning, post-traumatic stress disorder when it comes to, recognizing that there are similar cognitive symptoms that come up with PTSD as with TBI. But in addition to that too, right? In addition to this idea of overlapping symptoms, there's also this need for us as professionals to recognize that anytime we are talking about this person's injury, we are talking about their trauma. Okay, we are talking about the trauma that they experience, which can be very triggering, and so we have to be careful with that, in making sure that it is a trauma informed conversation, that that it's not some form of interrogation, but really we are asking the right and necessary questions to possibly identify this issue. Lastly, as though there weren't enough barriers, right? Lastly, there are survivor misunderstandings and misinformation around brain injury with diagnosis and treatment and recovery. So let's say, we finally, we're able to identify possible brain injury. We're having that conversation. We've got that rapport, all that stuff. And now we're maybe trying to provide, some other educational resources. I've had it all too often where people have said, oh, well, I've gone to, I went to the emergency room. Maybe it's in that small percentage of people who actually went to the emergency room. I went to the emergency room. They did a CT scan, but they said that nothing was there. So they completely, completely just toss the idea or the possibility of brain injury out. And we know from the brain injury field, we know that neuroimaging, a lot of neuroimaging is they're limited, especially CT scans. They're limited in being able to capture damage on a cellular level, and so with that, there comes the possibility that we may be missing a lot of people because they're ruling it out right away after something like that. The other big misconception that I've heard with survivors, from survivors, is when they say, like maybe they identify with some of the mechanisms of injury, like, yes, that happened, but I didn't lose consciousness. Okay, I didn't lose consciousness. We know, again, from the brain injury field, that majority of concussions do not result in loss of consciousness. Okay, and so some of these misconceptions, like I said earlier, some of these misconceptions, it's misconceptions like these that really can create a barrier to survivors accessing the appropriate resources and information, and really taking care of themselves, and these are actually, like, the misconceptions is actually a really big thing that I address in my group, my 14 session group, with some of the guest speakers that come in and who address some of these common myths when it comes to brain injury. So yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah, right. Well, that just means that there's a lot of future research and work to be done in this field, and
absolutely.
Great research, so hopefully that can be done. But thank you for sharing that and for sharing a great overall introduction to this topic. I think it's so important to be having these conversations and to be bringing awareness to it. So definitely. I'm going to go ahead and put your email on the screen. So for those of you that didn't hear earlier, Trish has agreed to share her email. So if you have any questions that you didn't get asked today, or any questions, or just want to connect with her, feel free to reach out to her. Her email's right down there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about this and introducing the topic. We really appreciate that and enjoyed having you. And just a reminder to anyone who's watching this, we're going to have 3 more events similar to this one, 3 new speakers over the next 3 weeks to share their knowledge and some of their experience on the intersection between brain injury and domestic violence. Our next speaker is going to be Rachel Ramirez. She is the founder and director of the Center on Partner-Inflicted Brain Injury from the Ohio Domestic Violence Network. So be sure to join us next Friday, August 7th at 1 p.m. to hear her talk a little bit more about the research and some of her experience with this intersection as well. And if you didn't catch some of this video, we're going to be posting it later so you can rewatch it. It'll be on the Facebook page. But again, thank you so much, Trish. It was great having you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I like I said, any chance that I get to be able to talk about this, I'm all in for it. And just like you said, you know, for anybody watching this, if you want to reach out, if you have any other questions, if you want to talk about a case or anything like that, I would be more than happy to talk with you.
That's awesome. And her email is right here. All right. I hope everyone has a good rest of their day, and we'll hopefully see you all next Friday.